Hi there, I'm Hugh Griffiths, and this is the second video in a short series, my short series on photography basics, Photography 101, in which I'm trying to help you to become a great photographer. In this one, I'm going to be looking at some of the controls on your camera and how they affect the photograph, how they impact the photograph, the way it looks, the way you want it to look. I hope at the end of this video, you'll have some more ideas as to how you can play with your camera and do the settings so that you get more effective, more impactful photographs. So let's go straight into the presentation. You get a new camera and it's a little bit frightening. It's got lots of dials, it's got buttons, it's got screen on the back, it's got rings on the lens. Are you going to break it if you do things with it? What's the impact going to be? Well, the first thing for me to say is actually you're unlikely to break it. Kick it around and you will, but I don't recommend you do that. But the controls are there to help you to set the camera up to the way you want it, to take photographs in the style that you want. Sometimes it feels like you're just walking into the mist. You don't know where it's going to end. Is there an end? Is it nice? I hope at the end of this video, you'll feel a little bit more confident about using your camera. First thing you need to know is that, it's a quote from Marius Veith, your most important gear is your eye, your heart, and your soul. We talk like this in composition, that composition matters more than technical things, and indeed it does. It's you, your composition skills, your artistic skills, your capabilities in taking and choosing and finding scenes that are worth photographing. That's what makes a difference. We're going to cover in this episode these things: the exposure triangle, focusing, white balance, depth of field, light metering, a series of letters, which I'll talk about, menus and manuals. There's an awful lot more in terms of controls on the camera, but these are the ones I think that are really important. Exposure triangle first. ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. I'll explain these as we go along. But these three things impact the exposure of the photograph that determines whether it's a good picture, how bright it's going to be, how dark it's going to be, how much is in focus, how much is not. So I'm going to start with aperture, which controls how wide or big the hole in the lens is and allows more light into the sensor. The small aperture numbers, this is a bit counterintuitive I should say, small aperture numbers give a bigger diameter of the lens. So as a photographer we say f2.8, small number, is the largest diameter of my lens that I can get. f32, f40 or whatever is a much smaller hole in the lens, smaller light, less light coming in, and that gives so the larger number gives a smaller hole. Depth of field is impacted by this, and that's the amount of the scene from back to front that is in focus. And large aperture numbers provide a very long depth of field. So you take a photograph with a large aperture number, a very small hole in the lens, you get a lot of the pictures in focus. A small aperture number, vice versa, you get a very small depth of field, a very small part of the picture is in focus. So this is what they look like. f1.4, the lens is wide open. f8 is getting closed, and all the way down to smaller numbers, larger numbers with smaller holes. So some examples of that. This picture I took of Heather's. I didn't want you to be distracted by the background. So f2.8. Heather is in focus, but the background is not. That's what I wanted. I wanted you not to be distracted. This picture, f14, everything's in focus, and it's a very distracting picture. It would have been better, I think, if I had focused simply on the flower and got a very shallow depth of field in that. Speed. This also impacts the amount of light in the sensor. A faster speed means less light. Slower speed means more light. The lens is open for longer, so you get more light coming in. Shutter speed does two things. It changes the brightness of your photo, so a slower speed gives a brighter picture, but it also can be used to create dramatic effects by either freezing the action or blurring motion. So freezing action at fast speed, if you're photographing sports or car racing or a bird in flight, or something like that, use a fast speed to try and freeze what they're doing so that you catch them without them just turning into an unfocused blur. Sometimes, of course, you want to blur, and it's a slow speed can give you motion blur. So I'll show you a couple of pictures of this. You've got water pouring through it along the river, and you may want to just get a single feel for it. You don't want to have all the details of the dots and so forth. Don't forget, you'll probably need something to support the camera for slower speed, a tripod or a case or something, fence. Because with slower speeds, you're likely to move your hand very slightly, and that could affect the picture, cause the picture to go out of focus, blurred. So some sample photographs of a bee. 1/2000th of a second. Bees work really fast. They run around like crazy. And this picture was great because I focused on the bee, and his wings are sharp, his body is sharp. I think it's a great picture. Same for the seagull. These seagulls are flying off the edge of a cliff in Cornwall, and the wind was going hard. And I took this picture 1/2000th of a second because I wanted to get a sharp picture of the seagull coming towards me. That was this. Hyena. This is a baby hyena. It's cute and cuddly, despite being a hyena, I think. I did it at 1,000th because I thought baby hyenas are likely to run around just like baby children are. This one didn't. He just stood there, a bit frightened of all the tourists watching him. But I took it at 1,000th, and this is what came out. Car racing, I mentioned that. I wanted these cars to be crisp and sharp. I wanted the drivers to be sharp. I wanted the cars to be sharp, the wheels. That's what I've got. But here's a case with water. I photographed this in the Lake District. The rocks are there, they're sharp, the heather is sharp on them. But the water is just a blur of motion. You can see the direction it's traveling in, but it's not distinct. And I think it gives quite a nice effect. Similarly here with a lock gate in the way navigation is quite close to where I live. The lock gate is closed, there's a couple of holes in it, and the water is pouring through it from the canal the other side. I like the fact that the gate is sharp, but the water is just got a sense of pouring. It doesn't feel static at all. I've got the sense that the water is moving and coming in towards me. That was the impact I wanted. That's the effect I wanted. ISO. It's a measure of the sensitivity of the sensor in the camera to the light that hits it. The sensor is the bit that actually captures the picture, captures the photograph. It is simply a camera setting that will brighten or darken a photograph. A higher ISO number makes it more sensitive, and it will capture more light. It will convert more light into the things that it's recording. There's a cost, however. A photograph taken at too high an ISO will show a lot of grain, which is also known as noise, and might not be usable. So brightening a photograph via ISO is always a trade-off. Raise your ISO, and you're unable to brighten the photograph by a shutter speed and aperture instead. The aim should be always to use the lowest ISO compatible with taking a decent photograph. Actually, most editing programs can reduce the noise in photographs, but this does come at the cost of smoothing things out. I'll show you that in a second. But you can get rid of the noise, the grain, but edges get smooth and edges get softer. So first of all, looking at what noise is, here's some samples just taken from using a camera like mine with an ISO of 100. It's fine, it's crisp, there's no spots in there. 3200 is beginning to get some spots. 12,800 is quite a lot. And 102,400, that's an almost unusable picture. What's interesting is that the for most cameras, you really need to be aiming to use probably no more than 1600 ISO. Above that, you begin to get noise. If it's important to get a photograph in a darker environment, use a higher ISO. But you may find that photograph has got a lot of noise in it and may not be an artistic thing, but it may be a great recording of what you were taking at the time. So, a few months ago, I was at Ely Cathedral. I took this photograph of the high altar. There's a candle in front. This is the original. Then, this is after editing. The candle I've replaced with a sharper version of it, as I took a separate picture and photoshopped in. And the photograph was taken at an ISO of 5000, which is quite noisy. These two, you can hardly tell the difference in this size. But if I go on, expand the area just above the candle to the right, you can see that this picture has got lots of grain, noise in it. Uniformly spread, but it's a lot of noise. So I applied my denoise program and came out with this. Woo, a lot better. The noise has gone, you can't see those speckles. Equally, some of the detail has gone. On the edges, they look a little bit soft. But I reckon that was a okay trade-off. So if you go back to my photograph after the event, that's what it looks like. A lot of difference. Much better photograph. Depth of field, we've talked a little bit about, and focusing, but we'll talk a bit more about it now. Focusing. We're usually aiming to have a sharp focus on the point of interest in our pictures. Tack sharp, photographer will call it. No fluffy edges, many of us will also call it. I've got a question, do you always want it to be sharp? No, not always, but we'll come back to that in a second. The eyes, if you're doing a photograph of a person or an animal, the eyes should be sharp. We look at people's eyes, animals' eyes is the first thing when we look at them on a photograph. They should be sharp. So in taking portraits, make sure that the eyes are the sharp bit. Focus on the eye. The point about sharpness is that it gets the viewer to look at what we want them to look at. I don't want to have the background or whatever it is around them to distract the viewer. I want you, the viewer, to look at what I want you to look at. Which means that the focus should be sharp on the main point of the photograph so that you can see details where necessary. Some examples here, like the duck, very sharp. Now, if that duck had not been sharp, you would have, the picture would not have worked. But I've got the duck sharp from front to back. And I think that really is nice. It's a nice picture of a duck. Not the prettiest of ducks, but it's okay. Another one here. I wanted a lot of stuff to be in focus here. I wanted to have the cricketers. I wanted to have the stand at the back. I wanted to have the name of the sponsor of the competition. And they're all in focus. So I set it so that the whole scene is in focus here, because actually the whole scene mattered. Now, there's two ways you can do it. There's autofocus, another auto, which you let the camera do all the work. Camera identifies the main points and ensures that they're sharp by moving the lens in or out to achieve that. Although, to be honest, in most cases, the focusing movement is within the lens and the lens itself doesn't change length in most cameras, or most lenses. Most cameras allow you to move the focus point around the screen and to have varying sizes of the area that you want in focus, which is, of course, quite helpful if you've got a small part of the scene you want to have focus and the rest of it not, but you want to really emphasize that part. You want to be able to move the focus point just to there and have just that bit in your focus screen, focus point. Manual focus is the option, another alternative. You can turn a ring on the lens and to bring the image into focus. Now this is harder to do, obviously, because you do it, not the camera. But it does allow you to choose where you want the focus to be. You can twiddle that ring until you've got the right part of the picture in focus. I talked about, do you always want it in focus? Of course, it may not, because it can give you a blur. It can give you a lovely artistic effect. You can do it in various ways. Manual focus, so that all the bits, you set it so that all the bits you want blurred are blurred. Or you can move the camera while taking the shot, known as intentional camera movement, another jargon. I often do this by accident, and becomes unintentional camera movement, I guess. But you can also create this effect in your editing. So here's a picture that was sharp in the original, but now it's all blurred. I've changed it because I wanted to get an impressionist image. I wanted it to look something like Monet's garden. And that's what it does. I think it's quite attractive, and the colours are good, and you're not distracted by anything in it. Intentional camera movement. I took some photograph of Heather, and I moved the camera up and down while I was taking it, and I got this effect. It's like flames, I think. Yes, it's the heather. You can see the leaves see the leaves on it, but it looks more like flames to me. That was the effect I wanted to get. Depth of field, of course, these two are related, and you want the main point to be in focus and all around to be soft or blurred or out of focus. Like that duck, I wanted the water in the background to be out of focus. Portrait photos are a prime example of this, where you want just the person to be in focus. The background, you don't want it to be distracting you from that person. But sometimes you want as much as possible to be sharp. For landscapes, for example, where you want the whole thing from front to back to be sharp. You don't want just the mountains at the back to be sharp and the everything in front of it not to be blurred. As a hint, there's a thing called a hyperfocal distance, which is the distance to focus on that maximizes the sharpness of the image from front to back. You focus about a third of the way up the picture from the bottom, and that maximizes the focus through the picture. Samples. Large depth of field. I focused on the flowers here, and it's tough to see them, I think, because you've got the stuff in the background acting as a sort of a distraction for you. In this picture, I focused just on the heather, not the right part of it, I have to say, but just on the heather, and the background is now gone. It's blurred, it doesn't distract you. And that's what I intend. I want you to look at the heather, not the heather flowers here in front, not the stuff at the back. Similarly here, where actually this picture is quite nice. I like it as an abstract. I like the lines and things in it, the patterns, but it wasn't what I intended. I wanted you to look at the flowers in this picture. So this is a better one with a shallow depth of field. The stuff in the background has gone out to focus, but the foreground has as well. But the flowers are sharp, and that's what you look at. That's what you see when you first look at the picture, and that's what I wanted you to see. White balance. Another jargon. This is the process of ensuring that the colour your camera sees is the same as that which your eye sees. Cameras, whether film or digital, have to convert the light they see pardon me, into colours, just as our eyes have to do. But the technologies are different, obviously. So your eyes have a brain to work on, your cameras have got electronics to work on. And so the way it changes things may result differently. In practice, there's a thing called auto white balance, another auto feature. It's really good. It works well. The camera guesses what the light colour should be. I use that most of the time. But it is sometimes worth experimenting when you're taking photographs indoors. You could choose tungsten or fluorescent or incandescent light balance, depending on the prevailing light source. If you're in a room where you've got bulbs in there. If you take photographs in RAW format, I'm not going to talk about RAW in this series, but just a point, take photographs in RAW, then you can change the white balance during editing, which can be very useful. So here's next picture taken outside, taken with the color balance set to be for an indoor lighting on the left. And it's rubbish, isn't it? On the right, the white balance is set correctly to daylight white balance, and to me that's a picture. The two old men with their cat chatting to each other outside this house, posters on the wall. I had a trial run with my camera in my dining room, and tried it with different white balance settings on the camera. So here it is with automatic white balance. It's close to right, not quite. So I thought, let's try other things. Day white, that's far from correct. That really is far from correct. Nope. You can see from up here that there's light coming through the window. It's a full light. It's not a shady day. Warm white. Now actually, that one worked. That's the colour of the wall. That's the one I could choose, and that's the one, if I was going to keep this photograph, which frankly I won't, because I think it's not a nice, not an exciting picture. That's the colour to use, the light balance to use. Metering. So many of these subjects are interrelated, aren't they? Metering means taking a light reading. A properly exposed image is made by balancing 3 tones of light. The shadows are the dark, the mid-tones, and the highlights are the light, the whiter areas. And it's essential to getting the correct exposure by metering correctly. Don't forget, correct, it means the way you want to see the result. You may want to override the exposure calculated by the camera because you want to have it darker or you want to have it lighter. But that's a call. The camera will calculate it based on what it thinks is the correct value. Most times that's okay. It's worth knowing though that most cameras provide a number of metering modes, and basically these affect the area of the scene that the camera uses in its calculations. Sometimes they use the whole, sometimes they use parts of the screen of the scene. Cameras differ in how much they provide in this. Look at 3 or 4, 4 or 5 rather. Average scene metering looks at the entire scene and calculates an average exposure that balances all the different light levels in it. Useful for landscapes where it's just a whole picture that you want to have metered. Evaluative metering is similar but cuts the image into different areas and then averages those areas. Then center weighted. Takes a circle covering about 80 to 60% of the image, centered around the center point as its source of information. And that's useful. It's only useful if the center point center area has almost all the stuff that you want to emphasize. It may be too bright in the sky and you don't want to include that in the area that you're exposing. And partial metering similarly, it's a much smaller circle down to 10 or 20%. And spot metering goes down to a really small circle, about 1 to 5% of the image. By default, this spot metering is on the center point and partial metering on the center point. But many cameras allow you to link the spot metering point to the focus point of the picture, regardless of where it is in the scene. So, for example, if you're photographing a person and they're on the left of where you're photographing, you want the light metering to be on them, not on the center. So you can move the metering point to the point that you're focusing on. Again, some examples here. Heather, you've seen this a few times. Evaluative metering. It looks at the whole picture and calculates something, and it's all right. But this is what I wanted you to see. I spot metered on the Heather in the center, and suddenly cut the speed, it cut all sorts of things, and all the stuff on the outside is dark, but you can see and focus on and look at just the point I want you to look at, which is the Heather in the center. Spot metering. Letters, series of letters. These are the modes of a camera. And there are different modes that sort of oversee the exposure setting. So there's automatic modes, semi-automatic, and finally manual. Automatic modes, there's 2 of these. Auto, AU. Everything is set for you. The camera does all the thinking, you just point, focus, and go. That's it. You can't change anything. program mode, everything is set for you. You can change things like speed and aperture. But when you do this, all the other values change outside of your control to keep the exposure the same. Then semi-automatic, aperture and speed priority, A or S on most dials. You set the aperture and the camera sets the rest, which gives you control over the depth of field in the photographs. If you've got a Canon camera, A isn't there, there's a TV instead. I don't know why. S for speed. You set the speed, the camera sets the rest. Speed priority is known as. And it gives you the chance to capture fast-moving objects by setting a faster speed, or to blur the motion by setting a slower speed. You have the choices there. And the camera sets the rest. And finally, manual, where you set everything yourself. The camera does nothing. You do it all. It's not always as frightening as it sounds. It's not. Do it a lot, and you get used to it, and you just do it, like driving a car. And in fact, proper photographers sneer at using the automatic modes. I don't. Maybe I'm not a proper photographer. I have found that if I've used the P mode or the All mode, that they're very often as good as the other ways of doing it, and considerably easier. The guesses that the camera makes are often quite good. But in practice, I mainly use aperture priority because I want to have the right depth of field for the individual photograph. In fact, I reckon most professionals live in aperture priority as well, the semi-automatic mode. I move to speed priority when I'm photographing movement, so car racing, birds in flight, wildlife of any sort, or children in any situation. Children never still, are they? Unless they're watching CBeebies. And manual is seen as the gold standard, but to be honest, I almost never think it's worth the hassle. Finally, manuals and menus. Menus are where you can change all the settings on the camera. You can personalize the camera so that it works the way you want it to work. If you're moving from one brand of camera to another, be aware there's different menu structures in every brand. And some menu structures are more diabolical than others. Sony has a bad reputation for this, although they are getting better. You need to go through the menus and understand what the options are and to set it the way you want it. And by the way, the more expensive your camera, usually, the longer the menu system is. So my camera, I've got 50 or more menu pages, each with about 6 to 8 items on them. It's huge, a lot to go through. Here's where you find it on the back screen. There's a menu button very often, and maybe a touch screen or maybe driven by the dial on the right. Read the manual. The manuals are boring, aren't they? They're technical. Be aware that you may only have this available on your computer. It may be on the disc that comes with the camera. It's not printed in a book. It's worth going through it. Not everything will mean something to you, but you are likely to get some ideas of what you can do. You can talk to people with the same camera or similar camera. Get ideas from them. You can check out on the internet. There's loads of YouTubes and discussions that help you to know how to operate your camera. So, no easy way around it in terms of menus and manuals. Search the internet, go through the manuals, go through the menus, make the changes you want. By the way, don't worry, you're not going to damage anything by making these changes. You can always go back to what they were before. And I'm going to finish by providing a couple of quotes. The first one is from John Cleese, great John Cleese. Creativity isn't the possession of some special talent. It's about the willingness to play. I've talked about this a number of times on composition. Willingness to play. You can play around with these settings, change them, see what the effect is. Photos are free on digital cameras. And to reprise that quote from the very beginning, the single most important feature of the camera is the 12 inches behind it. A similar quote from one of my heroes, Ansel Adams. You, your brain, your face, your thoughts are 12 inches behind a camera. So, you've seen the controls, we've done the composition. Let's go. Let's just do it. Enjoy yourselves. And by the way, don't privatize your photographs. Don't have them living just on your camera or on your computer. Show them off to people. Well, thank you for watching this video. The third video on the topic of editing is the third and the last in this short series. Don't forget, you can replay them whenever you want to. Thank you, YouTube. Cheerio.